let me just say that I know that there are many people on this call who are frustrated by the Biden administration's foreign policy, and I will be honest with you, I include myself in this, especially on a set of issues that I'm really engaged in. For example, like on Cuba, I don't understand why we haven't at least gone back to the Biden administration's policy on Cuba. Uh, but then I need to remind myself that President Biden has only been in office for about 100 days, and most of his key administration officials most have been in for even less time than that. And the transition process, especially at the Pentagon and at the State Department and at Homeland Security, was terrible, or it didn't happen at all. And in every agency, high-level key officials and decision-making positions, as we speak, still remain vacant. Now, I don't offer this up as an excuse, as you will hear sometimes from the White House or the State Department, but as a reality, it's a reality that we need to deal with. And any number of times a week, I turn around, I'm trying to call somebody on a particular issue, and whether it's at the State Department or Homeland Security, or for that matter, the Department of Education or the Department of Transportation, and I don't have anyone to call, and it's frustrating. That is a challenge that we have to deal with in the immediate short term. So I think we need to understand that the Biden-Harris foreign policy is very much a work in progress. Some things have happened, and in too many cases, nothing has happened, which means that the Trump policies and the Trump trajectory continues. For me and many of you, that's not acceptable. But on the other hand, it also means that we have the possibility of still influencing new and different approaches if we can find somebody to talk to. And so, yes, that's frustrating. It's very frustrating. And yes, that's dangerous as well, because it's easy to get comfortable with the status quo. And as far as I'm concerned, the status quo in many areas has to change. It's not just that it's not good enough. It's that it's bad. It's bad policy, bad for our nation, and too often downright inhumane towards millions of people who live and suffer in other countries where their misery is exacerbated by some of our failed policies. But not all is gloomy. President Biden immediately rejoined the Paris Accord on climate change, which I think is important. And he held a summit yesterday on the issue of the climate crisis, which I thought was incredibly positive. And now we have to make sure that we put meat on the bones of his climate agenda. He immediately rejoined the World Health Organization, made a contribution to the Global Fund on Vaccines to address the global pandemic, and helped push through Congress and sign into law the American Rescue Plan, which finally included substantial funding for global health and food security. The United States has rejoined most international and multilateral organizations that Trump boycotted. We're getting back to nuclear arms control negotiations, and we're re-engaging with our European allies and our NATO allies. And then, of course, we will carry out a safe and orderly withdrawal of U.S. and NATO troops from Afghanistan, to be completed by September 11th this fall. I know for a lot of people on this call that you have shared my frustration over the longest war in American history. And many of you lobbied for initiatives that I and others have introduced over the years to try to bring that war to an end. But I do think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel here in terms of ending this war. I had a briefing with the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense just a few days ago. This is real, and they explained, how it was going to be done and what we need to be concerned about as they draw down. But nonetheless, they are committed to meeting that September 11th deadline. The administration has designated Ricardo Zuniga as our special envoy to Central America, and they actually send him to the region to look at the root causes of migration and the situation on the ground firsthand. I think that is an incredibly important sign, because so much of our debate and our discussion on what is happening at the border is always about walls and drugs, and we haven't focused in on what the realities are in these countries that people are fleeing from, nor have we discussed the fact that we, the United States, have a moral obligation to these people, because we created, um, mostly through our policies beginning in the 1980s, we created a situation where there's civil unrest, where there's violence, where corruption continues to thrive. So we owe uh, the people of Central America. I look at it almost as a discussion on reparations based on what we did in terms of our policy in the 80s and the 90s. We, the Biden administration is still trying to wrestle with what is happening at the border. They inherited this mess that the Trump administration created, a very hostile system. But even though I know the administration is undertaking dozens of policy reviews, like the one on sanctions, for example, they can't continue to slow walk or do nothing on so many critical foreign policy and defense issues. The clock is ticking. Time is wasting. It's not to the advantage of the Biden administration to look the same as the Trump administration in any way, shape, or form. And the longer the decisions are put off, no matter what the rationalization, the more the hopes of people and governments around the world will sour and turn to cynicism. So, trust is going to be even more difficult to rebuild, again, especially after the last 4 years. Partners are going to be even more difficult to find, because we engaged in agreements that then we reneged on when Trump was president. And opportunities will slip through our fingers and be lost. The Biden administration almost missed the boat completely on sitting down and negotiating with Iran to get the JCPOA back up and running. And I'm still, quite frankly, I'm still very concerned that the US might mess it up. By appearing to go back on his campaign promise to immediately rejoin the JCPOA, we confused and we undercut our allies. We alienated even further the Iranian regime, and we made the US look like the bad guy. So that's not a smart policy. And it certainly isn't an effective strategy on getting Iran off the nuclear pathway. So the Biden administration, 100 days in, while certainly much better than what we had, and I am grateful for that, is a mixed bag. And for me, it has been frustrating. Which brings me to a couple of final observations. I think Cole sent me a couple of potential question and answers that might come up in a few minutes, but each question kind of ended the same way. How can we cut it? How can we end it? And how do we make things better? How do we change it? What can we do? The answer is just as basic, and that is we do it the old-fashioned way. We build a larger and more diverse organization and a movement. I always tell people that politics is about addition, not subtraction. And I think we need, especially in the social justice and the peace and justice movement, we need to engage more people. We need to be thinking out of the box on how to build what is already a very, very effective movement in Massachusetts, and to even bigger. And that requires some out of the box thinking. When it comes to members of Congress, those strategies have to be individualized. How do you get somebody to say yes? How do you persuade and get people to feel comfortable to move off positions that they've had sometimes for decades, to come more to a position that is advocated by mass peace action and peace organizations all over the country. We have a great congressional delegation in Massachusetts, but on a lot of really important legislative initiatives, we're not all there. And so, I think we need to figure out, how better to make sure to at least hear that everybody, is not just going to vote the right way, but actually go on legislation and lead some of the efforts that we want to see move forward. And because quite frankly, I always think of Massachusetts as the leader in everything that's good. And so if we can't get it perfect here, then it makes it more difficult for Oklahoma, Florida, Ohio, Michigan, Idaho, or Mississippi. Right now, we have a 2-vote majority in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, we hold a 0-vote majority. The vice president is the deciding vote. That's our political reality. And that's the speaker's political reality. And it's also a reality that exists inside one of the most poisonous and distrustful congressional landscapes that I have ever experienced in all my years as a congressional staffer or as a member of Congress. And I certainly can't guarantee any of you that in 2 years we will still hold the House or the Senate. I hope that we do. I hope we build on these majorities. I hope we have progressive members to build on these majorities, and we have them for the next 100 years. But you know as well as I do, the only thing for certain is that we have this for these 2 years. And so, I suggest that we start to think earlier, for example, about amendment strategies when it comes to the DoD authorization or appropriations bills or any of the other appropriations bills. Oftentimes we don't start building the movement for certain amendments until like a few days before the amendments are going to come up. Obviously, we don't know for certain what's going to be whether what's going to be in order or not. I mean, but now as chairman of the Rules Committee, I can tell you that we're working more diligently to make sure that these progressive, forward-thinking amendments are in order. But we have to start building that movement earlier, and so I would just say that I have been doing a lot of thinking again in the aftermath of January 6th about how we got to this position, to this moment, and what I could have done differently or better earlier, and I'm constantly trying to figure out ways to make sure that when we're debating these issues, especially when it comes to issues of the defense budget and a sensible foreign policy, that we are having these debates based on fact and on reality, not on perception and preconceived notions or just plain conspiracy theories. And so, in any event, it's a discussion that we need to have further on. But I'm just going to conclude, and then we'll open this up to a discussion. I'm ready to do everything I can to move as much as I can in these next 2 years, and I want to win. I don't want to be bringing things to the floor that feel good but go down to historic defeat, because that shows weakness, and that shows, and sometimes it sends the wrong signals to agencies and departments like the Pentagon that somehow Congress wants more rather than less, or that the people want more rather than less in terms of our defense budget. So I look forward to working with all of you to be focused, to be smarter, to be more effective. And again, I'm grateful to everybody on this call for all that you have done to make our country and this world a better place. So with that, I will yield back, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Thank you so much for your words, Rep. McGovern, and thanks for being so gracious with your time to take questions from our members. The first one that I have here is from a constituent of yours in Northampton, Massachusetts. Michael Kowalczyk has a question about Venezuela. Michael, go ahead.
Thank you very much for your talk, Representative McGovern. And I just want to say I'm happy that I wrote this question down because I jumped the gun a little bit and asked earlier, and I posed it to the other James McGovern. So hello, Cindy. Nice to see you. So Representative McGovern, we met virtually in February to discuss the US government's role in furthering the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. I had the pleasure of seeing you speak before outside your office in Northampton at a Venezuela solidarity rally that I helped organize about a month ago. My fellow activists and I are encouraged by your positions on Cuba and Venezuela, but we need more than words now. You support lifting blanket sanctions against Venezuela, and on the question of so-called interim president Juan Guaido, you said, "I have never ever acknowledged Mr. Guaido as somehow the leader of Venezuela. I am disappointed that many of my colleagues on the Democratic side have acknowledged him as somehow the legitimate leader of Venezuela. He is not elected as the legitimate leader of Venezuela." Additionally, you said, "Our policy towards Venezuela or any other country ought not to be motivated by greed." So my question is, and there's a few parts to it. First, how are you going to translate your relatively progressive stances on Cuba and Venezuela into action? Second, will you co-sponsor Representative Omar's sanctions bill once it is reintroduced, even if it doesn't immediately succeed? Third, if Representative Omar does not reintroduce her bill, will you introduce your own legislation to move away from blanket sanctions as a key element of US foreign policy? Fourth, will you commit to publicly pressuring President Biden and your Democratic Party colleagues who are hawkish and interventionists when it comes to these countries? And finally, will you write another public letter like the one that you wrote on January 14th and seek co-signers to the Biden administration urging the president to restore US-Cuba relations, cease recognition of Juan Guaido, and immediately end blanket sanctions on Venezuela? Thank you very much.
Well, that's a lot of questions, but I appreciate them. So let me start with Cuba. I mean, as I said in my opening, I'm disappointed at it would seem to me like low-hanging fruit. Like let's go back to the Obama Biden policy. So I've had a number of conversations with the State Department. I've sent them a letter on that, and we're not going to give up. My hope is that we can at least get back to that. Obviously, the issue with Congress is more difficult because we have to repeal the Helms-Burton law, and we have a problem not just with Republicans, we have a problem with some Democrats. So I'm not sure where the votes are on that, but we're going to also look toward trying to lift restrictions on U.S. travel and on humanitarian aid and on some agricultural, commerce as well. On Venezuela, look at it. And I think, as I said to you, when we've talked before, and I said at that rally in Northampton, I don't believe. I think these policies of blanket sanctions end up hurting regular people and don't end up doing anything to the people that we claim we have a beef with. And in this case, it's the Maduro government. And I think those sanctions have taken a real toll. I mean, people's lives have gotten more and more and more miserable. And as a lot of people who have met with me on these issues have told me about friends and family members and how these sanctions have impacted them. And so, I'm taking some hope in the fact that the Biden administration, at least has not continued to impose more and more sanctions on what is going on on Venezuela. The Biden administration did grant temporary protected status to Venezuelans here in the United States, which the Trump administration wouldn't do. I read yesterday, and I think when I raised this in Northampton at a rally, I was concerned that the Venezuelan government wasn't allowing the World Food Program to come into Venezuela, and people need food. Apparently, they have an agreement now with the World Food Program, so the UN World Food Program will go in and be able to help provide meals to school-aged children in regions most impacted by food insecurity. And so, look, I think one of the things that, and again, on the Omar letter, on the Omar bill, I will either co-sponsor it, or I'll come up with my own on sanctions. But we will work. I will work with her. I would just say this. I mean, the thing in Venezuela, the difficulties in Venezuela are not a large part of the problem is internal, and people in Venezuela are going to have to figure these things out that we can't dictate. That's why I thought recognizing Guaido was a bad idea. I mean, the idea that we would come in and just say this is the president of Venezuela. I mean, I thought that was a mistake. I say that as somebody who's not a fan of Maduro. I co-chair the Human Rights Commission, and I continue to be very, very concerned about that. But again, I think we have more ability to impact the human rights situation if we're not approaching Venezuela with a Cuba-like policy of blockades and saber rattling and threats all the time. That there has to be a better way to do this. So I don't know if I answered all your questions, but yeah, but please know I've already had some preliminary discussions with the Biden administration about taking a fresh look at all of this. Now, I just say, here's a political problem we have. The same political problem we have with Cuba. We have some Republicans, mostly, but a couple of Democrats who have kind of looked at Venezuela as their new Cuba. And so the ability to have rational conversations and debate sometimes are very, very difficult. But we need to try, and we need to start having more and more members of Congress say we need to take a different approach to Venezuela. So we'll continue to work with you on that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you for your answer, Rep McGovern. This next question I'm going to ask myself, but it's one in the chat from Prasannan Parthasarathi on the issue of war powers. I understand you recently held a hearing on the importance of updating war powers for the 21st century. I'm particularly interested in this because of the case of Yemen. We were all very excited when President Biden said he would stop supporting U.S. support for offensive operations in sanction on Yemen. Unfortunately, his special envoy just had a hearing, actually one in each chamber, and he was unable to answer Representative Ted Lieu's very basic question on whether we continue to support offensive operations with Saudi Arabia in Yemen, which was surprising to me that he didn't know the answer to that question. At what point do you feel it would be necessary to reintroduce a war powers resolution, as was introduced during the presidency of Donald Trump, to ensure that Mr. Biden, President Biden, lives up to his promise to stop our role in the worst human rights situation on the planet?
Yeah, no, it's disappointing, and as I said, I'm trying to figure out whether it's like they're still getting their act together or whether or not where this is their policy. Look, we ought to be. We should not be selling any arms or providing any arms to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, regardless of their purpose, at a minimum until the Saudi coalition stops its support of the Yemen war. And so, we will be looking at defense authorization and defense appropriations bills as ways to do that. I've talked to Ro Khanna. And I know he's talking to Bernie Sanders about another war powers resolution. It may come to that, but I think we need to give this just a little bit more time to see if we can persuade them they initially said some things that I thought were very, very good, and when they declassified the documents on who killed Washington Post journalist Khashoggi, I thought that was a positive thing. But they ought to be able to answer Ted Lieu's question, and And so I will, I'm open to that, if that's what it comes down to. But I think we also ought to be preparing amendments for appropriations and for defense authorization on weapon sales to Saudi Arabia. But it is a horrific humanitarian crisis that we should be ashamed that we have any role at all in any of this.
Thanks, Rep. McGovern. I know you have a special interest in this.
And by the way, I should also say some of the war powers stuff that we're talking about, it is to make sure that we have some hearings, is to make sure that Congress has a role in what it goes on. And it's to make sure that if ever again a future Congress passes an AUMF for the to authorize the use of military force anywhere, that at least there's a sunset on it. I mean, we're talking about, the AUMFs of 20 years ago. Well, the AUMF that George H.W. Bush used to, get Iraqi troops out of Kuwait. I don't know. It seems like 100 years ago. That's still in effect.
That's right.
So I mean, we have to clean all this up. And what gives me some hope we might be able to do that. Usually, what ends up happening is every time we talk about this, the party the president, whatever party the president is, if it's a Democrat or Republicans, if it's a Democratic president, Democrats don't want to do anything. If it's a Republican president, Republicans don't. I think that's the Republicans said they want to do something, and we have enough Democrats that want to do something. I think we might be able to make some progress on war powers in general.
Thanks, Rep. McGovern. I know a lot of the Yemeni Americans that I've talked to who still have family in Yemen are concerned about that, the issue of the partisanship and how that may be affecting it. But I'm very pleased to hear that you're looking at that, and we appreciate it. I want to move right along. Lots of great questions here. I know that Jeff Klein has one on a specific piece of legislation. Jeff, are you with us?
Yes.
All right.
Hi, Representative McGovern, Jim. I want to start by saying thanks for all that you are doing within Congress and outside. Especially, I'm grateful for your vocal support of the striking nurses in Worcester. Yeah. So I want to ask you a specific question about a piece of legislation that you supported in the past. Betty McCollum has filed another version of her bill, which is HR 2590, to essentially hold Israel accountable for its use of U.S. military aid against Palestinian human rights. And I'm hoping we can count on you to co-sponsor that bill. You haven't yet, and I'm hoping you will.
Well, I will look at it when I get back to DC. And I originally did, but then she changed it, and she added language dealing with the Leahy law, which Senator Leahy had an objection to, and it seemed to get kind of wrapped up into a whole bunch of other things. Look, the issue of the Palestinian children and how Israeli security forces have treated them is a serious issue, and to be honest with you, we need to find a way to move that issue forward with as many people, including people who are strong supporters of Israel, on board. I mean, this is a human rights issue. This just should not. There's all kinds of nuances and differences when we talk about our Middle East policy, but on some things we ought to be able to come together. So yeah, I will take another look at it. I hope it's not loaded up with a whole bunch of stuff that, in terms of whereas clauses, that might make it difficult to actually move it forward in a way that it could actually pass on the House floor. Because this is the kind of issue, quite frankly, we ought to be able to have a majority to be able to support a statement on this. And oftentimes there are the way some of these bills are written, makes it difficult. But I will take a look at it. If it's much more about the children and the Leahy stuff is taken care of, then I probably will. And if there's a problem with it, I'll let you know. But find another way to actually move something forward, and hopefully, maybe we can actually get something on the House floor and have a debate. But I'll talk to Betty when I get back.
Please do. My own rep, Ayanna Presley, has been a co-sponsor, and of course, your old boss, Joel Oakley, used to be my rep back in the day, and
I miss him.
and yeah, me too. So I hope you'll join her at least. Sometimes standing up for what's right, even as a minority,
Right.
is important.
Right.
Hope you do it.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I gotta unmute myself. Thanks. Next, we're gonna go to Mojgan Haji, who has a question about the Iran deal. You're up, Mojgan.
Thank you. Hi, Congress.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, Representative. How are you?
I'm
Thanks for
good.
being here. So we've met so many times on so many different issues, and I know you know that the JCPOA is pretty, dear to me. Being from that region of the world, and you've been a champion of diplomacy, and you've supported that all throughout. And as we know, some of the representatives are also for returning to JCPOA, but a lot of them are very quiet and they're not really publicly supporting it. And I think at this time, it is very important to support it publicly. Will you be open to doing any op-ed or anything more publicly tweeting? I know you've tweeted about that before, but this is a critical time. Or putting more information on your website, or even encouraging your colleagues to be more vocal about returning to JCPOA.
Yeah, I'm happy to do. I'm happy to explore ways to help make it more comfortable for more people to take the position that we all share here. As I said in my opening remarks, I was nervous that the Biden administration seemed to be dragging its feet initially. That seems to be changing. I worry the time is running out. And look, I think the hesitancy by some, who are trying to figure out whether they should, say anything, is because they look at this issue in the context of of things that Iran has done in the region. And my response is, if we can agree and move forward on this agreement and deal with the nuclear question, then we have the basis to have conversations on things that we think Iran may be doing in the region that give people pause. But if we can't get this right, then we're not going to be able to talk about anything else. Let's think of things that we can do that might be helpful. But clearly this is the right thing to do. Look at it. If in fact Trump had stuck with this agreement, imagine where we would be today. Imagine the discussions we would be having today would be much, much different. And I worry, and I know you do too, that there are some people who, through their rhetoric have gone so far out there that it's hard for them to come in, be a little bit more restrained and actually say, okay, let's negotiate. And so that's why, we always have to try to, even on when we somewhat support some of the things that are being said, that if people get so far out there and so belligerent and so militaristic, then we can never get them to say yes on these things. So we will work with you. If you have any ideas, let me know.
A very focused, specifically, the JCPOA about the nuclear, issue, focused op-ed. I think it would really kind of weed out all the other things that they're bringing into the discussion where it actually doesn't belong. Might be helpful.
I'm happy to help anyway. I would just say I'm working on an op-ed on Cuba right now, so I'm just trying to. But I would also say that as an Iranian American, sometimes you have more credibility than a politician. So a lot of the people on this call have expertise in areas that are far more, they make you far more persuasive than me or another politician. But we can amplify some of the things that you say. But we can, let's figure out, that's a good point. I think our focus has been pushing the Biden administration to move. They're starting to move. So, we have to make sure that the congressional support is there.
So just quickly, I don't want to take up too much more time here, but what you mentioned about being Iranian American, I mean, we can also work with National Iranian American Council, their policy folks, in terms of cooperating with doing an op-ed, if you're open to that, that's an idea as well.
Well, we can talk. Yeah, let's figure out
Okay.
how we can. Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Next, I'm going to throw it over to Joseph Gerson, who has a question on U.S.-China relations, I believe.
Congressman, first of all, I want to thank you for just your consistent progressive leadership in Congress. And we value it so deeply. And I also want to celebrate your courage on January 6th, which, just inspired us all. What I want to say is that I've been working with Michael Clare, who you may know in your district in Northampton. We've created an organization called the Committee for a Sane U.S.-China Policy. And we're very concerned about really the dangers as we move into a new Cold War. Our understandings from people we talk to in Washington is that attempting to have a sane conversation about what U.S. policy should be instead of just automatic anti-Chinese, really almost hatred, is radioactive. And we're in a situation, as you know, in which we're essentially in a Thucydides trap between rising and declining powers that in most cases have led to disastrous wars. One of the most disturbing set of actions by the Biden administration has been its pursuit of the new Cold War with China and its failure to focus on building cooperation, even despite our very real differences on the existential threats of climate change, pandemics, and nuclear war. I mean, John Kerry's visit and work is a step, but it's hardly where we need to be. Following Trump's ratcheting up of military and diplomatic confrontation with China, and we've got Biden continuing that, building it with the useless, provocative freedom of navigation, naval operations in the South China Sea. Go to war with Japan if necessary over the uninhabited Senkaku Daio Islands, and the ratcheting up of diplomatic and military ties with Taiwan. In any of these situations, if you have an accident or miscalculation, it can all too easily spin out of control, escalate, and lead us to a disaster. So my question coming down to this, where we face at the moment the Menendez bill, which seems to be a set of horrors, what can we do to begin a rational discussion to oppose the Menendez bill and build toward common security as we did with the Soviet Union rather than going to war?
Joe, that's a very good question. I co-chair the Executive Congressional Commission on China. So I've been thinking a lot about this for the last 3 years. And quite frankly, I don't see why anyone would want to pursue a policy similar to a Cold War strategy. I think that's just a disaster on so many levels. And no matter what our priorities are in China and with U.S.-China relations, it certainly doesn't require or doesn't justify a military buildup or an increase in the U.S. military budget. So let's get that on record. And being economic competitors, well, that's normal. I mean, not the exception. And also in foreign relations. So we're in competition with Europe, for crying out loud. So I mean, so I share your concern about the bill that you mentioned, and because it seems to me that that's like a push for a more militant and hostile posture toward China. In my operating principle when I deal with a lot of foreign policy issues is basic human rights and rule of law and democracy and dignity for all people in this country and in El Salvador and in wherever anywhere in the world and in China as well. And I don't want hostilities. I think that's a mistake. And I'm trying to use my position to say that, yes, we can highlight our differences, and there are some major differences on human rights. I think what China's doing in Hong Kong right now is terribly unfortunate. What's happening to the Uyghurs, the way they treat the Tibetans. I can write down the list. I mean, there's some real serious points of strong, not only disagreement, but I mean, some of the things that are really quite horrific. Having said that, you know, we have to deal with China. And you mentioned John Kerry. I talked to him just a couple of days ago, and he was talking about what a good visit he had. Look, I mean, we have to find where our commonalities are. We know we disagree on areas of human rights, but we can, you know, if we can all agree that we want to save the planet, well, boy, there may be a place we can build, you know, a better relationship that could help lead to discussions on the areas that we have real disagreements over. I don't know what it is about getting elected to office, but I think sometimes people get elected and they think that the only way you can be tough is to rattle the sabers, or is to I'm going to send the fleet to the Pacific, or I'm going to increase my military budget. That makes me tough. Well, Christ, if there's ever a war with China, God help us, right? I mean, you know, so we have to find that balance, you know, where we stand up for human rights, and where we make it clear that our beef is not with the Chinese people. It's with some of the policies advocated by the Chinese government. But we understand that we have to work with them on things, not just the climate crisis, a whole range of other things we do too. And that's why I thought it was unfortunate the way Trump kind of introduced this kind of racist element to the pandemic.
I know.
Because you know that has made it easier for the Rubios and the Menendezes of the world to come up with militaristic solutions. It also has translated into a spike in anti-Asian hate crimes here in the United States. So I mean, we do this, and so look, we need to we have to we understand we have to coexist, we have to cooperate, but we also, I believe, have a moral obligation to call them out when atrocities are occurring, and again, you can do all of that without going overboard to a point where we're on the brink of war. And so I'm going to, you know, I've talked to the speaker. I don't want anything coming to the House floor that somehow signals a more militaristic approach to China. You know, so that's where I'm coming from on this.
Just to say that's very helpful, and to say that our SANE committee is national, with kind of leading scholars and activists across the country. And I think what we'll do will be to try and be in touch with your office so we can see how we might better coordinate, because your response was just ideal. Thank you very much.
Okay, next I want to turn it over to one of our very important activists, Sonny Robinson, who wants to talk about a region that I know is very important to you, Rep. McGovern, and that is Central America.
Hi, Jim. Good to see you. Thanks for all you do. I do want to double back to what you were saying about Central America. I couldn't agree with you more that what the U.S. really ought to do is reparations for what we did in Central America in the 80s. But since that's unlikely to happen, what do you think we can do to actually shape the aid that may move forward this year so that it actually fosters development at the local level, and unfortunately does not repeat some of the mistakes of the Obama aid, which poured too much money into the hands of corrupt military and police and militarized the border and fostered extractive resources for US corporations rather than actually doing development at the local level for people, whether that's agriculturally or industrially. So how can we shape that so that the very small amount of money that's proposed actually either gets greatly increased or ends up in the hands of people who are really create opportunities that will help youth stay in Central America and have real opportunities there rather than coming to the US or getting sucked into the gangs?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And the vice president hopefully is going to, among other things, make the region a priority for our foreign policy. I mean, one of my critiques of Obama and Trump was they didn't really care. I didn't seem to care very much about like what was happening inside these countries. And now in El Salvador, you see the rise of a Trump-like leader and President Bukele, and you have all these, terrible corruption scandals in Honduras, and then we have issues of judicial integrity in Guatemala. So the idea that we're going to give money to the governments, no, we have to have a different approach, and that is we have to be supporting community-based development. We have to projects that that may working through NGOs or through mechanisms that we have trust in, that we know are not going to politicize the aid or punish people with the aid or misuse the aid. I'm the author of a program called the George McGovern, Robert Dole Food for Education, International Food for Education Program. It's basically a global school feeding program, feeding some of the poorest children in school settings in some of the poorest countries and most difficult countries in the world. And the key to a success is that we don't give the money to the government. So the McGovern Dole program that I visited in Colombia didn't go to the Colombian government. It went to an NGO that we know has the trust of the people in Colombia. It could be a Colombian-based NGO, or it could be an international-based NGO. But I think that's the approach that we have to deal with aid, at least for the time being, until these countries can deal with the issue of impunity and massive corruption. And look, one of the biggest reasons that people from places like El Salvador are coming to our border, it's not just the violence, it's now hunger. It is hunger.
Right. That's right.
And it's like, I mean, so we have to start talking about what's happening at the border in terms of what's happening in these countries. And then, as you said, we have to come up with a plan to get aid. And it's not just us, the international community should be part of this as well. Aid to initiatives that will help stabilize the situation, provide people the ability to put food on the table, create opportunity. And look, one final thing, in terms of these economies down there developing, no business is going to want to locate in a country where it is unsafe, right? I mean, it's just, I mean, you're not going to move your family down to El Salvador when you're afraid that your kids can be kidnapped or were murdered or or victims of gang violence or whatever. So that's kind of a long-term strategy. But in the short term, the focus ought to be on humanitarian aid. We got to be working through NGOs and institutions in these countries that we trust, that we know will do the right thing with the assistance we give them. But it's serious, and if we want to deal with the crisis, if we want to deal with people coming to the border, the only way to do it is to help make things better in their home countries, and we have to play a role in that.
Well, and I completely agree. The crisis is not at the border. The crisis is in the home countries. And a piece of that added to the aid is not only getting it into the hands of small communities, but getting it into the hands of small communities with the assistance to help them cope with climate change because of the crop failures that are happening all across the dry corridor.
Climate refugees now. We have climate refugees. Yep. And then add to that the natural disasters, the hurricanes and other things.
That's right.
I mean,
I think we have to look at climate disasters as natural disasters and make sure they get included and how we address that if we want to help people truly be able to stay home, because no one migrates if they have a chance to stay home.
Right. I agree. And as somebody who has, and let's also say these people are migrating, notwithstanding the fact that when they came to this country, they were separated from their children. They were treated in the most inhumane ways possible. things are getting a little bit better, but they're not better in terms of anywhere near acceptable. People come here, it's a traumatic experience to come here, and then they're traumatized further. So the motivation that forces them to leave has to be, as we all know, must be very, very powerful, because it's not like we're welcoming anybody with open arms. And so, we also have to make sure that we are obeying our own laws and also international law as well, because there's a lot that has gone on under not just Republican administrations, but Democratic administrations that really kind of go against our values, and we have to make sure we hold everybody to account. And I am so happy that Joe Biden is president and not Donald Trump, because I feel we have an opportunity to be able to move forward. But that doesn't give him, a free ride. That's right. I mean, just because he's a friend doesn't mean we can pressure our friends, and that's what we have to do in a constructive and effective way. But we have to pay attention to Central America. We really do.
But we will definitely stand with you and support you if you can get that aid structured in a way that it will get the aid into the hands of needy people. And thank you so much for your time and all you do.
Thanks, Sonny, for that really important question. Rep. McGovern, do you have time for one more quick question?
Yep. Yeah,
Thank you. I want to turn it over to Peter Metz, who has a question about one of our most important issues, and that is, of course, nuclear disarmament. Peter, take it away.
And I prefer to call it eliminating nuclear weapons or creating a nuclear-free world. I think
even better, Peter.
Yeah, we're beyond disarmament. First, Jim, I just want to thank you. I mean, you are such an inspiration, and we are so lucky to have you there. So you give me optimism, and then, frankly, Joe Biden gives me optimism, because he has all the right instincts, and we have never had a president who has understood how Congress works as well as he does. So I continue to remain optimistic about him. So on the issue of eliminating nuclear weapons, and I'm not going to ask you to do something. I want to hear from you what we should be doing. My sense is, going from the statement that Joe Biden made 4 years ago as he was leaving the vice presidency, where he committed himself to a world without nuclear weapons, and he said the US must lead the effort to get us there. I'm assuming that's still his operating philosophy. And he got us back in, he renewed the START agreement right away. And that was an optimistic and encouraging thing. So the question is, how do we help Joe Biden have the courage of his convictions to vigorously pursue eliminating nuclear weapons, vigorously pursue attaining a world without nuclear weapons? What can we do? How do we let him know he has our support? How do we, I don't even want to call it pressure. How do we give him a nudge? How do we, back him up when he takes this courageous step and announces that he has initiated negotiations amongst the 9 nuclear states to simultaneously get rid of their nuclear weapons? How do we do that?
Well, I think you're right that his instincts are the way you described, and I think he, would like to be known as the president that moved us away from the brink, that at a minimum substantially reduced our nuclear stockpile, or that moved away from, quite frankly, President Obama's multi-trillion-dollar effort to modernize all our nuclear weapons. But look, I think and this may sound simplistic, but this is just the way I feel. Having been in Congress now forever, is that it's a political body, right? I mean, if this is a campaign issue, if people think people are going to vote against them if they don't get on the right side of pushing the president to move toward the abolition of nuclear weapons, I mean, if people feel there's a political consequence to being silent on this, you begin to move people. I mean, and that, and I mean, we all, there ought to, and maybe we should be talking about, some sort of a statement or a letter that comes from Congress that can give the national grassroots something to lobby on. I'm happy to work with you on something like that. But, I used to joke with people that if I introduced an amendment to cut the military budget by 1 penny, it probably would lose. Because people somehow think that it is more politically advantageous to look like they're not trying to reduce our military budget than it does, to do that. And I think so. I think we just have to organize around. If that's our main mission, that's what we want to try to get him to do it. Then we ought to organize around it. We ought to figure out what we're asking. It ought to be specific. We need to mobilize our volunteers. People need to find creative ways to be able to get this message out. You had a candidate on, right before me. She ought to, to the extent that we talk about these things in our campaigns. I mean, Joe Biden's got a lot on his plate. He's got a lot to fix, from the climate crisis to what have you. So, I think to the extent that we can be wind at his back, and maybe, we ought to figure out what is that, maybe a congressional letter to him saying we appreciate, your statements, and, we will be there for you. But we have to do a campaign, and we have to show him that we have the votes to back him up. So I think those are the two things. I wish I could have something more clever or inventive to be able to say, but it really, look, this is politics. This is a political body. We have to. I think he might want to do it, but I think he only has so much political capital and wants to know that if he does something, that there are people behind him. And so maybe we can talk at some point about how we can create some of that pressure, in Congress, and maybe talk creatively about ways that nationally we can make this more of a focal point. But I think this is the issue of our time. And as we all know, as reports are, if nuclear weapons were ever used anywhere, even in a limited capacity anywhere, it impacts the entire world in a catastrophic way. So it can't even. We have to move more aggressively toward getting that message out and taking steps to get rid of them. And that's why, I will say this, and I'll close with this. Look, Vladimir Putin is not a nice guy and has done some horrific things, but that hasn't stopped the president from wanting to sit down and talk to him about arms control.
And he should. Yeah,
and he should. And I think, and we need to make sure that he knows that we think that is a good thing, that we have his back on that. Because I can tell you right now, there are a lot of people who I serve with who will be sending the opposite message to him. And it's similar to the discussion we just had on China.
Right.
Sometimes it's more important to talk to the people, your adversaries, than your friends.
Very important.
Yeah, in this case, it's vital, right? So let's come up with some ideas on what we could do, maybe in terms of a message from members of Congress to Biden that we all think might be the right message, and then I'm happy to engage with you further on this. And let's figure out other members who want to join with us, at least initially, on this, because we have Don Beyer from Virginia heads up this new group called, I think it's the I forget, maybe if Cindy's on, she can scream it up. He's got a new arms control group.
It's like the nuclear working group or
The
something.
nuclear working group, right?
Yeah.
And that may be, we should let's kind of narrow down what we want to do. And this is a group of some new members that we might be able to bring into this, and we could all join together. That might be, might be a way to get something going. But I'm happy to work with you on this. And look, I'll close with this. As I tell my staff, I have more yesterdays in this job than tomorrows, right? And so, with what tomorrows I have left doing this job, I want to get as much done as possible. And I want to, and we in these 2 years, again, they're not ideal. I wish we had a bigger majority, but we can get some stuff done. And we could even, and we're going to have to talk strategically about, some of these bills that if we, what is it, what has to happen in a military appropriations bill, and what kind of, for people to support it. Because again, when we have to figure out, is that what, if we get this, and this, we're going to support the military budget, even if we don't like this, and this, if we can get to that point. Because what ends up happening is, and this is the conversation that I always have with the chair of the Armed Services Committee. He's like, I agree with you on all the things you want me to do, and I'm going to put some of this stuff in, but you're not going to vote for my budget. You're not going to vote for my bill. I said, I'm not, because the overall number is too big, and he's like, well, but if I keep your things in there, I'm going to lose Republican support. So if I have to pass the bill, how do I do it, right? And if you're the chairman of a committee, you want to pass your bill. And so that's the thing we have to figure out, right? And it may be we won't be able to get to that point in the next couple of years, but nonetheless, there are some things we can get done. And we're going to have to, and let's get them done. Let's get as much done as we can. And hopefully good policy is good politics. And people will say, hey, you know what? It does make a difference who gets elected. And then we can build on our majorities and then really bring all this stuff home. So in any event, the political realities are sometimes very complicated on these things, as you all know. But I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But anyway, I am grateful to all of you. Please be safe, and we will see you soon.
And thanks so much for sticking with us and giving a lot of one-on-one time to some really important activists here at Mass Peace Action. We really like your attitude of leave everything on the field, push the ball as much as you can, and we're going to work with you to get our shared priorities into place. Including hopefully doing everything we can to shrink that military budget and get even more votes than we did last time for a significant cut to the military budget.
And even though we're not dealing with the bill yet, I think Congressman Pocan will probably introduce it again. I think the chairman of the Rules Committee will make sure that amendment is in order. So we will have that debate. So, all right. Okay.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for your time. And we all look forward to continuing our work with you in the future.
Thanks. Be safe, everybody.